What's up, duelists? RBT Rulers is a couple of weeks away. Actually, a little bit less than a couple of weeks away. It's the end of the year RBT Invitational. All of the players who have topped and earned their invites are going to come together to battle for the final championship series of this season. It is super hype. Make sure you are subscribed so you catch that live stream. It is going to be on November 18th. You don't want to miss that. And then one more thing before we get into this banger tier list is if you guys want to become a member, a lot of these decks, I work on them before they become public in members only videos. There's once a week members only videos. It's $2.99 a month. It helps support all the tournaments that I throw. It helps support me making this content and stuff, and it means a lot to me. So if you want to become a member, do it. All right, we are doing the November Edison tier list. That's what we're doing today. I've got 5 different tiers. Can win, can top with some luck, and I'll talk about the luck necessary. Has potential, meaning it hasn't topped yet or won yet, but definitely has the potential to. And then GTFO tier, which I'm sure you guys understand what that means. There's also a lot of other decks in Edison format that are undiscovered, underexplored, that I'm not going to be including in this tier list just because I don't want this to be 17 hours long. There are just too many decks in this format that have potential. Decks like Gadget Blackwings, decks like Harpy Quick Draw, like decks that just are really cool in theory and could potentially like actually do something in a tournament, but I just don't have enough time to cover all of them, and I don't expect those decks to pop up in this upcoming RBT Rulers because it's less than 2 weeks away. So I'm just going to be covering, I think like 50 decks roughly with lists, of course. You guys know how this goes. So let's just hop right into things. The first deck I'm going to talk about is the classic Quick Draw Dandy Warrior. This is the most recent, no, this isn't the most recent topping Quick Draw list, but this is one of the most recent topping Quick Draw lists. This is the list that Feng Shui used to top RBET, I believe, at the beginning of this season. He earned his invite with this deck. It's a strong deck. It's a strong deck. I think it definitely slots into. Hold up, I'm gonna have to search all these because I don't have the assets ready. Let me see if I have the tier list folder. Hold with me, everybody. Your patience is greatly appreciated. Greatly appreciated. Oh god, the retention is dropping. I can already tell. It's already dropping. It's over. It's Jover. Everybody's left the video. It's too late. There's no coming back. Where's my image of Quick Draw? Where is it? Where's that boy? Where's my son? Where's that boy? Where's he at? Oh, here it is. Okay, cool. All right, we got Quick Draw Synchron. All right, so I'm going to slot this bad boy. I'm going to slot it into can top. This deck consistently tops tournaments. Usually puts like one copy into top 8. It hasn't won a tournament yet. So I'm not going to put it in can win just because it hasn't won a tournament yet since the Shonen. The Shonen was the first time Quick Draw won, and the Shonen was the last time Quick Draw won. So it's been 13 years. I got to put it in can top just because it can, and it's good, and I think it has great matchup spread against the field, but yeah. So similar to Quick Draw, Hamster Raiko Kaya's deck, Vayu Turbo, this deck is honestly on paper and in playstyle very similar to Quick Draw. The only difference is that this deck gets to play Royal Oppression, which is a busted card, whereas Quick Draw doesn't really get to play that card. Quick Draw does have some advantages over Vayu Turbo, namely Debris Dragon being broken and Drill Warrior being broken, but I think that on paper, Royal Oppression is just that strong of a card, and I think also being able to play Dark Arm consistently makes this deck really strong. This deck has won quite a few premier events this year, which is surprising to me personally, just because I don't rank this deck as highly as some of the other decks on this list. I personally, when playing this deck, feel that it is often worse than Quick Draw, but because it has won multiple premier events this year, I got to put it in can win because it has. That's pretty much it. My personal opinion on the deck, I think it's about as good as Quick Draw. It's stronger in some matchups, weaker in some matchups. It just kind of depends on what you go up against. But yes, very similarly, it is a Hamster Raiko Kaya's deck, and it plays just the same thing. You just hope to mill something good with your Raikos. You pop a back row. You get a little bit of incremental advantage here or there, and then it adds up. This is the first place list from RBET Orlando, which I'm sure many of you watched the live stream of. You can catch that VOD on the channel under the live streams. All right, next deck. Next deck, also Hamster Raikou Caius. This is a top 8 Flamvell Rescue Cat deck list. We're going to be covering 2 for 1 here. We're going to be covering Flamvell and Rescue Cat all at once. I'm going to use Rescue Cat as kind of our what is it? Emblem. Our emblem. There we go. Rescue Cat. There we go. There's that boy. I think this deck needs a significant amount of luck to top this Flamvell Cat deck list. It is another Hamster Raikou Caius deck list. So you have that same engine. You have that same like Pot of Avarice engine, but your payoff isn't nearly as good as like milling a Dandelion or milling a what's that other card? Vayu and Sirocco. You have to mill Flamvells, and then you also have to draw Rekindling. This is the top 8 list from a 1K tournament at Xanadu. This is Michael's top 8 Flamvell Cat list, so it can top. It just needs a little bit of luck. I think it's a little bit less consistent than the other 2 decks, and you play a little bit more underpowered cards, namely X-Saber, Airbellum, Gravekeepers Descendant, Neospace, and Dark Panther. You have 5 very underpowered cards in your deck. Whereas like in the Vayu Turbo deck, you really only have 3 underpowered cards. It's the Vayus. They're pretty terrible draws. And then in the Quick Draw deck, you only have like 1 or 2 underpowered cards, and it's like Titanial or like Debris in your opener with no graveyard setup. So I think because this deck just has more underpowered cards, you're going to have less consistent draws. You're going to have less ability to get out of bad situations in top decking mode. So I think this deck is definitely worse than the other 2, but it is shown that it can top. So I'm going to put Rescue Cat or Rescue Cat Flamvell, those types of Rescue Cat hamster decks. They can top, but it takes a little bit of luck, a little bit of bracket luck. All right, and then the last Hamster Raikou Caius deck I want to talk about is just pure Flamvell. This deck got 2nd place at Karlsruhe tournament in Germany. There were 200 players, which is a very impressive showing for Flamvell, but it is the only showing for Flamvell. So once again, I'm going to have to put it in Ken top with luck. This deck is basically the same as the other deck, but it's just not playing, I believe, Hamster. Or no, it is playing Hamster. It's not playing Rescue Cat. Yeah. Instead of playing Rescue Cat, you're just playing more bombs like Dark Armed and Chaos Sorcerer. So you do still have those like underpowered draws in Flamvell Magician, but there are less than the Cat version of the deck that can have like triple Airbellum, Descendant, etc. Even the Flamvell Magician's on top of that. So I think this is a slightly more consistent version. While it doesn't have that powerful Cat play, it does have those strong late game top decks in Dark Armed Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer. So I think it is a little bit more individually powerful, individually impactful than the Rescue Cat version of the deck, which is much more combo avarice oriented. They're functionally the same on the tier list. I'm not going to get too much into detail. All right, let's close these tabs out so I don't have 8 trillion tabs crashing my computer right now. All right, that's going to round out the first part of this. Let's get into the next part of this. This is also sort of a Raikou Caius deck. This is a top 4 Dragon deck list from RBET Orlando. I'm going to go ahead and cover all of the Dragon decks at once because I think that they are very functionally similar. This one does play those Raikous, those Debris Dragons, so you can have that like 1-card synchro play. You do have the generic removal in Raikou. You can mill Wyvern Red Eyes, which is a decent mill. These decks, I think, are better than the other decks here listed. Basically, I think Dragons are, in my personal and professional opinion, in the top 3 decks of the format. So I'm going to put them in can win. I'm going to cover all of the Dragon decks all at once here. There's this version of it that has Raikous and Caiuses. There's this version of it that has DD Warrior Ladies. This type of list got top 16 at RBET Orlando. I personally have an undefeated tournament record over the last year and a half with this deck list. The deck is just very good. Like, it's just very, very strong. It's very competent. And this is the first place Rejuvenation list from RBET Moreno Valley. Rejuvenation Dragon Turbo deck list also won an online RBET. I'm gonna add a little bit of a differentiation. I'm gonna search for Super Rejuvenation. Hold up, everybody. Hold up. Yeah, we'll use this as the Dragon Turbo. This deck has also shown that it can win tournaments. It's won 2 RBETs this year, which is a very large amount of RBETs. Very, very strong, high ceiling deck list. I think it's a little bit less consistent than the other Dragon deck lists, but yeah, this is definitely one of the best decks in Edison format. How you want to approach it is really up to you. I personally prefer this list with the triple Drago. I think this card's insane into all the other top decks in the metagame. And playing the max number in your main deck is just awesome. I also think DD Warrior Lady's broken as heck. But I do think that you could play any one of these 3 deck lists and pretty much have a very, very good shot at tournament success. They're just amongst the most powerful decks in Edison format. Red Eyes Darkness Metal is not errated in Edison format, so you can use it multiple times per turn if you have 2 of them, for example. You can special summon it multiple times per turn if you have 2 of them. So you can bust out some pretty crazy OTKs, and you can kill through Gore's Vader Trag thanks to that powerful Kawaki Mirror Drago. Also, you do have the most powerful spell card in the game, which is Future Fusion. This is the scariest card. If your opponent is playing dragons, they go first and they activate Future Fusion. That is the scariest card to see in the game going first, by far. There's nothing even close to it. It's just the most powerful card in the game in Edison format. I don't think there's a comparison. I really don't. So it's just the highest ceiling, very consistent, very raw power deck list that has ways to shut out all the other top deck lists in Drago and just either high numbers of removal spells or just drawing your entire deck thanks to the power of Super Rejuvenation. You know, if a deck is playing Magical Stone Excavation, it's on a different level than the other decks. So I think that it's pretty safe to put dragons at the top of can win tier. All right, moving on from the dragon decks, because those are I'm a big fan. Obviously, dragon's best deck, baby. You know, I've been done saying it. What is this one? Oh, frogs. Moving on, frogs. So we got Frog Burn. This is a top 4 Frog Burn list from Moreno Valley. This is a list that has been worked on by Roundnook, initially designed by Roundnook, and then it was adapted by Homom to take it to a top 4 finish at RBE Team Moreno Valley. I think this deck is cash money. I think it's really cool. I think it's... Let me see. How would I rank it? It's definitely can top. I think it's like on the border of like can win. I think it's a little bit stronger into certain decks that are popular in the metagame than decks like Quick Draw are. Like, I think this deck is better into Blackwings than Quick Draw is, for example. Let me just move the Quick Draw over. So I think because of that, I'm going to place it a little higher in the can top sphere than Quick Draw. It's also had higher placements than Quick Draw. Getting top 4 at Moreno Valley that's very impressive. That was one of the most grueling tournaments of the year. He made it 13 hours into all the way through the tournament. He had to play through top 16. He had to play through 8 rounds of Swiss. Definitely one of the hardest tournaments. So making it all the way to top 4 is very impressive. And this is the exact list that he was playing. Yeah, definitely a scary list. The way the list works is you try to set up turbo cannon, and then you protect it with your battle phase stoppers, and then you blow up your opponent's monsters, and then you just burn them incrementally. And then if they ever like try to amass like a huge board or put up like Stardusts or anything crazy, you can just monarch them and chip them away that way as well. Using these battle phase stoppers means you're not prone to OTKs from decks like Dragon Turbo or Blackwings. So yeah, really, really powerful deck list. Next frog deck list I want to talk about is Coelacanth Frog. This is actually James Ark's second place deck list from the most recent Ultimate Time Wizard thing. Ultimate Time Wizard at YCS Richmond. I believe it was about 100 players. He made it to top 8 with this deck list. I think he made it to second place. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he made it all the way to second place. This deck list, I think, is worse than the previous one. I think that we haven't seen as much Coelacanth success as we've seen of like the Frog Monarch, Frog Burn Monarch strategy. I think also this deck list takes like a lot of practice and a lot of like skill to achieve functionally the same result. And comparable to the Flamvell deck list, you'll notice this deck list is playing a large number of just absolutely meme cards. I think you can look at James Ark's second placement at the YCS Richmond, and you can basically say that like, yeah, James is an insane player. I think you could have given him literally like any deck in the top 3 of these, and he probably would have made it all the way to the top 8. That's just, it speaks to him as a player more than it speaks to, hold up, I gotta find this super ancient Deep Sea King. There we go. Okay, yeah, it speaks to him more as a player than it does speak as the fish deck strengths, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like the deck was carried more by the player than the player was carried by the deck in this instance. And I'm going to put it in Ken top with luck. I'm going to place it higher, I believe, than... No, I think it's going to stay lower than Flamvell. I think it's right around there. He has a interesting profile on the deck on his channel. You can check it out. He talks about like some of the issues with the deck and some of the ways to play through certain things with the deck and why he plays his card choices. I'm not going to get super into it. I think the deck is, once again, it's a 5-card combo. You need Coelacanth, Sweeper, 2 Tributes, and a discard. So if you don't draw Coelacanth, also the deck just falls on its face most of the time. So yeah, it's definitely one of those decks that has a lot of potential to brick, but when you are comboing, you do feel like God. So I can't say that the ceiling isn't there. It's just that the floor is very low as well on this type of deck list. Whereas the floor on this deck list is you just have a higher density of threats. You're more consistently going to be drawing your threats. You have less bricks. This deck plays technically something like 20 bricks if you are counting multiples of certain frogs, as well as like multiples of the fish. Whereas this deck plays somewhere like in the ballpark of 8 bricks, depending on what your opponent has and how you configure your hand combination. So just less bricky overall, that sort of thing. All right, next frog deck list is Frog Heroes. This deck is disgusting. This is like your standard Frog Heroes list. I don't know if they play Foolish Burial. They might not play Foolish. They might play like Future Fusion or something. Foolish Burial is kind of a meme pick. I don't know if they play this card, but this is mostly your standard list. Maybe like a Regeki break over that Foolish Burial. I would say that this is definitely in the can win tier list. Let me see if I have a graphic for this guy. I should have prepared the graphics a little better. Hold up, lads. I know I've got something for this. Maybe I don't. We'll just use Substitoad. So yeah, Substitoad for Frog Hero, but Substitoad is definitely Frog Hero. I'm gonna put it in can win, because I think this is the best by far of all the frog decks. It has the least number of like dead draws. It has the most potential for like random OTKs. You can kill people with like a Junk Synchron and a Miracle Fusion. You have like 2-card OTKs, which is insane. It's definitely the scariest deck to play against because Double Miracle is like OTK out of nowhere, especially with like a couple frogs in play. If you have like a Treeborn and a Swap Frog and Double Miracle, I think it's like close to game, right? Yeah, it's like game straight up. It's like 9,000 damage, something like that. The deck just can kill you out of nowhere if it draws Double Miracle. So it's definitely one of the most potent OTK decks, even though it doesn't really look like it. It's one of the most annoying decks to play against because of the dupe block. You can't rush them down that easily because of Triple Fate or Gores. They don't play that many trap cards, so you can brick on your Heavy Storm and your Mystical Space Typhoon if they just don't draw their trap cards. And then sideboard, they have like ways to lock you out of the game in Vanity's Fiend, DD Crow. Burial makes it very difficult for you to hate out their graveyard. And Super Poly means if you're trying to mount like a counter offense with a couple of heroes, they can just steal your heroes and turn them into their own absolute zero, which is pretty terrifying. So definitely one of the most terrifying decks in the format. It's usually the deck I want to face the least going into tournaments. I usually over-prepare for this deck. And even in the tournaments where I've over-prepared for this deck, my tournament record versus this deck right now is 0-2. So I think it's up there for me with one of the best decks. I think it's actually better than Vayu Turbo. I think it's just generally underrepresented, which is why I think it doesn't have the raw numbers as some of the other decks do. But yeah, it's just a disgusting deck overall. Very, very powerful deck. Very skill intensive too. There are a lot of like unique lines with this deck thanks to the way the frogs work. In general, I think all of the frog decks are very skill intensive, so you kind of have to be really familiar with the mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh as a game and the mechanics of the format to perform at a higher level than average with these decks. I think if you're a newer player and you're playing the frog deck, you're going to struggle in some situations because you're not going to be aware of like certain interactions or certain lines that only comes with like practice. So these 3 decks in particular, I would say they go up even higher if you've practiced with them. Like once again, James Arc playing Fish is going to be a little bit different than like your average player playing Fish. If you're an average player and you're playing Fish and you don't have a lot of practice with the deck, it's probably has potential tops with luck. But if you're like James Arc, it's probably can top, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's where I'm going with these decks. All right, and then is that it for the frog decks? I think that might be it for the frog decks. I think that might be it. Yep, moving on. We've got Fairies. This is my own personal fairy list. I think this deck is busted to shit. It won last year's RBET Rulers. It has won a couple of circuit events, like 64 player circuit events. It topped a 100. It got second place at a 100-person tournament in on the East Coast. I don't remember exactly where it's at, but there's a store that it got second place at. And then it's also like just puts up a bunch of results like randomly here and there. It has more results than you'd think, but I think the biggest one that people are going to talk about is the Chaos Fairies winning DDV and the Pro Storm Fairies winning RBET Rulers last year. I think this deck has an insane matchup into a lot of the other top decks. I think this deck has like a 70-30 matchup into Vayu Turbo, especially if you build it something like this. I think it has like a really good matchup against some of the Dragon lists, and it just has that insurance policy of Herald of Orange Light versus most of the unfair decks. Decks like Rescue Cat, decks like X-Sabers, decks like even Quick Draw, when they commit a lot of cards into a drill, like they commit the 3 full cards to banish their drill, and then you can just Herald their drill and you get a 2 for 3 really easily, and there's no way they can interact with it outside of Dust Shoot. Coelacanth, they go 5 cards into their Coelacanth combo and you just Herald of Orange Light and you get your 2 for 5. This card is very broken. Honest is very broken. The core of this deck is very broken. Most of these cards are limited or restricted in some fashion, like you can only play 2 Honest, 2 Bottomless, etc. You're just playing a ton of power cards and then Dimensional Alchemist to reuse your power cards. The deck is very miserable to play against. I think this is my second deck on I don't want to play against this deck in tournament. I feel like Frog Hero is the number 1 deck I don't want to play against. I'm the most scared to play against, and Fairies is the number 2 deck. My tournament record against Fairies this year is 0-1, which is very frustrating because you'd think, knowing the deck as well as I do, I'd be able to defeat it more easily. And then, of course, the sideboard plans. Don't even get me started. I love this deck. I've made a bunch of videos on it. I think it's one of the best decks in the format, if not the best deck in the format. I would place it pretty highly. We're going to just set it right here for now, and we'll move forward. All right, next deck. Similar to the Fairy deck, this is the Christia Lightsworn deck list. This is more of a high rolly type deck list. If I win the die roll and I mill enough Fairies, I can really drop some insane boards with like JD Christia or like JD Soul of Purity with Herald backup, that kind of stuff. I think this is much more of like the Dragon Turbo version of Fairies, if that makes sense. It's very casino. It's very, very casino. And I think this deck has what it takes to top tournaments, but I don't think this deck has what it takes to consistently win. And then on top of that, I think it does need some amount of luck to top because it's very casino. You can very easily get hands where it's like double Soul, double Christia, JD, and it just does nothing. You can also get hands where it's like what is the thing that I was talking about? I was talking about something at some point. You can get hands where you just have a bunch of normal summons and your opponent has a couple bottomless and they just rush you down with a Blackwing draw. So I think that this deck has the least amount of play in its bad hands out of the Fairy variants that I'm going to show you. So as a result, I'm going to place it in Can Top with Luck. It did top an RBET this year. It also topped RBET Rulers last year. So I think that's where it made its debut, this specific list. Mumix debuted this list at RBET Rulers. I'm going to put it in the top of Top with Luck. It can definitely top, but it does take luck. It takes a little bit more consistency in a slightly variationed build. I think a slightly less all-in Christia build got top 4 at the most recent 100-person YCS Richmond tournament. I'm going to show you like a comparable list. I don't have that specific list, but this is like a more consistent version of the casino list. This is definitely more of a like hand trap spam, Pot of Avarice version of the list. It doesn't play Judgment Dragon, doesn't play Soul of Purity and Light. It uses Pot of Avarice to like keep up the card advantage. But this one has like a more consistent game plan. You get to play some number of traps. You get to play Heavy Storm, so you don't just fold to certain back row like Royal Oppression. And you're not like as flush on normal summons as the other one is. So I think these more consistent versions of the deck definitely move it up to Can Top. So it depends on what version of the list you're playing. But I think it's somewhere between Tops with Luck and Can Top. So I don't know, like somewhere in between. Like here-ish, if that makes sense. But it depends on which version of the list you're playing. All right, let's close out of this one. I really like this deck, by the way. This list is very fun. All right, moving on. Next deck we've got is Amaryllis Burn. This deck is so good. This is such a good deck. I don't understand. Well, I understand why most people don't play it. It's because Amaryllis is super duper expensive. Right now, it's like a $60 card, something like that, $50, $60 card in paper. So a lot of people don't play it just because it's a money bags deck. Edison is usually pretty darn affordable. Your first deck is going to cost you somewhere between $50 and $80 if you're building minimum rarity. This deck is definitely going to cost you upwards of like $300 if you're building even minimum rarity of it, which is that's a lot of money. That's just genuinely a lot of money. And most people don't want to spend that much money to play a game. That's just how it goes. Like spending $300 on a game that's more than buying like 3 video games. You know what I mean? Like you would rather just at that point just buy 3 video games, right? But yeah, so not a lot of people play it because of the price tag. If Amaryllis ever gets reprinted, it'll definitely see a spike in play. It can definitely top. It's topped RBET in the past. It got 3rd place at the Ultimate Time Wizard at Nats, which was I think the biggest Edison tournament this year. Was over 300 players, almost 300 players, somewhere around there. I think it was like 297 after the drops. So yeah, it topped the biggest tournament this year. It got 3rd place, I believe. Very, very powerful deck. Very, very powerful deck. The way it works is like you try to just mill a bunch of cards, very similar to the Lightsworn type decks. It's a Lightsworn engine. And then the cards you mill are either Dandelions or Plant Monsters or Amaryllis itself or Necro Plague. So you have a lot of high value mills. End phase, you can bring out the Amaryllis, and you just try to put your opponent down to about 2,400 life points. And then they're like 3 Amaryllis pings or an Amaryllis direct attack away from game. And they have to play the game in such a way that they will just inevitably lose to that burn because they can't play the game until they fight through your Amaryllis. And when they fight through your Amaryllis, they take burn damage. So you create a lot of checkmate late game situations with this deck. If you open Lone Fire Blossom, Titanial, this is one of the best decks to do it in because of how easy access you have to Dandelion. And the Hidden Armory DDR Mark the Rose package is something Carpath innovated, and it just works exceptionally well in this deck. And once again, Hidden Armory, it'll randomly mill, like 1 out of 4 times you activate this card, it'll randomly mill a good card. And then it can let you reuse DDR and Mark the Rose if you've milled them. It means you don't have to play more than the 2 equip spells, because this card can grab it back from the graveyard as well. And it helps you bring back Titanial after you've milled it and then banished it for Amaryllis. So you can create sort of a circle loop with Titanial. It's just the best deck with Titanial. This deck has a lot of free win matchups. Frogs is a free win matchup. Heroes is a pretty good matchup. It does pretty well into Vayu Turbo as well. The only deck it really struggles with, I think, is Blackwings is a tough matchup for this deck. But it has very good matchups into most of the top decks. And if you can just dodge Blackwings, which Blackwings are usually somewhere around 10% of the field, so like 1 in 10 of your opponents is going to be a Blackwing player. So if you get like 1 Blackwing opponent in 10 rounds, like you could easily top or win a tournament with this deck just because of the matchup spread alone. Also, trade-in is absolutely busted in this deck because you pitch Amaryllis and it's like a +1 trade-in basically. This deck also has like insane matchup versus decks like Norleras, like some other unfair decks we'll get into in a second. I think this deck is I actually want to put it in Can Win. The more I talk about this deck, the more I think it's just crazy good. I think it's on the same level as something like Vayu Turbo, or it's definitely better. I think it has a higher ceiling than like Quick Draw or like Burn Frogs. So I think I would definitely put it in Can Win tournaments. It hasn't yet won a tournament, but I feel pretty comfortable putting it there, just because I know if Amaryllis was widely available, this deck would be everywhere, and it would be really, really annoying to play against. Okay, next deck, moving on. Also, similar Lightsworn type engine with the Lilas and the Raikos to clear things is Scourge Norleras. This is Pizza's top 8 list from, I believe, RBET? Something? Oh, I'm forgetting. This is a RBET topping list. I think Norleras can top. I think it can top. I think it struggles with a couple of cards, namely DD Crow is really difficult for this deck. I've seen some players citing Prohibition in this deck list. I think citing Prohibition is a great way to combat hand traps like Herald of Orange Light, DD Crow, because that's the only way you really have to consistently interact with them outside of Trap Dust Shoot or like Divine Wrath, I guess. But yeah, I think Prohibition is the quickest way because you can just activate it and Norleras. You can do the whole thing on turn 1 if you open the nuts. And that's happened to me a couple of times. And every time they have Prohibition, I'm just like, man, this game is unfair. But yeah, this deck's great. You get to play the Dark Creator, very powerful card. You get a hand loop your opponent. You can reset under a lot of extreme circumstances thanks to Norleras Phantom. You have Grave Resources, so you have the powerful Vayu Turbo engine. The only thing about this deck that I think it's a little bit worse than the other Vayu Turbo deck is that it's more prone to bricking just because you have like potential hands where it's just like Norleras, Vayus, Sirokkos, and they just kind of like clog up your hand. So I think that this deck is more prone to bricking, despite being able to play the powerful trade-in and the powerful solar recharges. You're just more prone to bricking. This deck is really strong. I would place it a little bit, as of right now, probably a little bit higher than Frog Burn. It's close, because I think Frog Burn is an incredibly strong deck, but I think Norleras just has a higher ceiling. It has more OTK potential, and I think it won an Ultimate Time Wizard event as well. So maybe I should put it in Can Win. Yeah, we'll put Norleras in Can Win, because it did win an Ultimate Time Wizard event. Yeah, we'll put it in Can Win. We'll put it at the bottom of Can Win. Although Amaryllis hasn't won yet, I do believe it to be a better deck than Norleras. So I'm going to place Amaryllis above Norleras for now. And I'm going to group the Dragon Norleras alongside the Vayu Norleras. I think they're functionally the same. I personally think the Dragon Norleras is a little bit better because you have Future Fusion. But that deck is a little bit weaker to certain things like Royal Oppression. So I think it's a little bit, it's also harder to set up Wyvern Red Med, and there's other things that deck encounters that's a little bit more clunky than just Dark Refer naturally being able to pitch Vayu Sirocco. I think they're functionally the same in terms of like they can both win tournaments, but I think that they're like the bottom of the can win tier list. All right, next deck we've got Lightsworn, straight up Lightsworn. So how do I feel about Lightsworn in this format? Just pure Lightsworn. Realistically, I think it can top with luck. I think it's just a little bit overshadowed by the other decks playing the Lightsworn engine. I do believe it to be, I'm going to reorder this tier list, the top with luck tier list real quick, because I think Flamvell is probably worse than Fish. Actually, no, Fish is worse than Flamvell. Where am I going with this? I just put the Fire Dog behind 2 cards. This is why you watch my content, right? This is why you watch it? Okay, now it's upside down. This is great. This is wonderful. Smash like, subscribe. Smash like for this professionalism. All right, Judgment Dragon. Where's that boy? Get this Rescue Cat shit out of my face. Rescue Cat is worse than Fish. I'll say that with confidence. All right, let's get Judgment Dragon up here. I think Lightsworn can top with some luck. That's pretty much it. I don't think there's really much to say about this deck other than like it's clunky. You have some cards that like legitimately just can't be cast, like Wolf or like JD Opening Hand, or cards that are functional vanillas till you have a combo like Gareth or Necrogardener or Plague. So you have like a lot of clunky break potential hands, but the deck's power level is so high that like if you just have those good draws, it's unlosable. So I think that it's definitely a casino deck. It's really fun to play. This is one of my favorite lists of this deck. I think this deck is super fun. It's up there with like one of the most like beginner friendly fun decks where you can play it and just have a good time as a beginner. So yeah, good stuff. Can top with luck. Next deck. All right. Next deck is Machina Lightsworn. There's a couple different variations of this. This is my all-in Machina Lightsworn deck list. I think this list is super sweet, super exciting, super fun. But then there's also the more like controlled top 8 list from RBET Orlando that just plays like Hamster, Raikou, Lila. And then you look to mill Machina Fortress and turn your forces and your gear frames into 1-card reborns. And this deck is super nice. This deck was initially designed by Times2, one of the most amazing deck builders out there. He's like built a lot of cool teched out decks that have taken have had a lot of success. Basically, he's had success with Vanquishing Light. He's had success with what is that other card? It's like the one card that brings back a Lightsworn. I don't know, Glorious Illusion. Yeah, he's also like he's popularized a lot of really cool strategies. One of my favorite deck builders personally. So it's cool to see that his lists are even having success in other players' hands. I think this deck is very good. I think this deck is can top. Where's my Machina guy? There's got to be a Machina guy in here somewhere, right? How could I be so unprepared as to not have Machina guy? You've got to be kidding me. I don't have Machina Guy. Alright, it's cool. It's cool. We'll get Machina Guy up in this bitch. Hold up. Machina Guy. Yeah, I think it's in Ken Top. I think it's a little bit stronger than Quick Draw. It's a little bit more resilient than Quick Draw. And I think it's a little bit stronger than Frogburn too. The only reason I'm not putting it in Can Win is just because it hasn't yet. Literally, that's it. I think it has potential to win. The biggest issue with machine decks in Edison format is actually this card right here, Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. Everyone is just citing 2 generic like +1 Regekis versus you. So it's even though the deck, like let's just say Chimera Tech isn't in the format. This deck is easily just top of Can Win if Chimera Tech isn't in the format. But the issue is Chimera Tech is in the format. And so it can't be in the top of Can Win because everyone just has these 2 insane auto win cards versus you. You can play around it to a degree, but only to a degree, right? And then if your opponent even has a Cyber Dragon in their main deck, which is pretty common, it's a common tech card in like Blackwings. Sometimes Vayu Turbo plays it. Sometimes like even Quick Draw plays it. Like a bunch of decks just randomly tech Cyber Dragons. All of a sudden, like you're getting Regeki'd at -1 in the game 1, which is just brutal. It's just brutal. Plus, this deck does have some potentially bricky hands where you have multiple Force, multiple Avarice, and you just don't have access to Machina Fortress. And you do play a lot of -1s in the Book of Moon and Compulsories just to make sure your Fortress can stick around. So you do have some potentially brickier hands in these types of decks, which is kind of why I like this version a little bit more. Also in this version, which is really interesting, is you can actually side out all of the machine cards so you don't get hit with Cyber Dragon as hard. Whereas in this list, if you side out the machine cards, all of a sudden your deck just does nothing. So I think these decks are, again, top. And then the third version of this I want to talk about is, oh no, this is not the third version of this. This is the third version I want to talk about, is the Ancient Gear version. I think the Ancient Gear version is worse. And the reason why I think it's worse is because, hold up, I'm going to pull up the Ancient Gear guy. I think the reason the Ancient Gear version is worse is because you start the game at functionally -1 because your last field spell is always going to be a -1. So you start every game at a mulligan with this deck. And that's why I think this deck is worse. You're playing with 5 cards when your opponent is playing with 6. And you're just hoping to pick up that advantage elsewhere and like find ways to OTK when realistically it's just not going to happen that consistently. It's one of the most fun decks to play, in my opinion, because you get to play some of the sweetest cards in the format. But I think it is like around the fish tier. I think if you're going to go to a tournament and you're going to bring a Machina deck, you're probably going to want to bring something like the Lightsworn ones and not like the other one. Where the hell is that fish card? Super Ancient Deep Sea King Coelacanth. There we go. Yeah, it's probably slightly worse than like Flamvell or like the pure Lightsworn decks. All right, Machina deck number 1. I'm going to close out of this one. There's only one more machine deck I want to talk about, which is Jinzo, which we're going to talk about here in a second. There's a Jinzo list, and we'll close that one. Jinzo. So this deck so far has gotten second place at one big tournament, but I think this deck is unreal. I think this is one of the best decks in the format. I don't know how to say it. I just think it is ungodly strong. It is so unbelievably busted. We're gonna go ahead and use the PSV Jinzo. Oh, look at this swag. He's gonna take up more space than your average deck. Yeah, we're gonna put him in Cam Win. It's my favorite card. I'm a little bit biased about this deck, but I actually think it is unreal good. I have currently an insane record with it in online tournaments, 8-mans, that sort of stuff. I'm currently X1 with this deck lifetime, which is crazy. I think I'm something like 28-1 with this deck, which is the highest win to loss record I've ever had with the deck ever. So that's got to mean something, right? And I play this deck a lot in members only videos. So if you want to become a member, you'll see me playing this deck. You'll see me showing off some of the unique lines in this type of deck in the members only videos. Yeah, this deck is very, very, very good. I think it's just like the best of the Machina decks because you aren't gonna die to the Cyber Dragon comeback because there's not a time for them to come back. You just draw Future Fusion, you play it, and then you hit your opponent for like 10,000 damage. And then you're just like, okay, nice Cyber Dragon. And the Cyber Dragon is just sitting there in their hand. They never had an opportunity because it actually turns the weakness of the deck, which is Cyber Dragon, against the opponent because they sit there holding a dead card that they can't put into play to prevent your OTK. And then you go for the OTK, and they basically are at a mulligan if they draw their best card against you. So this is by far, in my opinion, the best machine deck in the format, and it's very terrifying to play against because it has a 1-card OTK. That's ridiculous. All right, next deck. We've got Blackwings. Where do you think I'm gonna put Blackwings? Let's be real. Blackwings is really good. Let's go back to the tier list folder. Blackwings. Shout out the Swedes, dude. Shout out Swedes. Yeah, Blackwings is one of the best decks in the format. So if we reorder the tier list up here, I'm gonna reorder this a little bit. All right. I think it's something like this or this. It just depends on your opinion of the format. I think if we're reordering the decks, I'm gonna put these all like on top of each other. Yeah, this is good content. This is really good content. This is what you guys are here for. In my totally professional opinion, considering I've played this format every day for the last however many years, I think these are the 3 best decks in Edison format. And I think that you can pick whatever order you want, but when you come down to it, Dragons, Blackwings, and Christia deck, Fairies are going to be the best 3. They're going to give you the best chances at winning. And the reason I think that is because if you look at this deck, it has no bad cards. You basically just have 40 good cards. And then on top of that, these 3 decks have free win cards. They have Black Whirlwind, they have Future Fusion, and they have Christia. And those are the only like really insane free win cards in the format. They're like the only like 3 cards where you play them and your win percentage goes from like 50% to like pardon me, to like 90%. And these are the only 3 decks in the format that can really boast that. So that's why I think that they're up here. Not only do they have no bad draws, they have no dead cards, but then they also have the auto win cards. Whereas like every other deck below this has like bad draws, basically. They have bad draws. They maybe have an auto win card, but it comes at the cost of like for example, Jinzo, it can play Future Fusion, but Jinzo can't play Future Fusion and not play like 3 Jinzo Returner, which is ultimately a fucking brick. Let me go ahead and move some of these bad boys around. Let's move the Rejuvenation up. Let's move the Substitute up. Let's move the Vayu Turbo up. I don't understand how Vayu Turbo wins, because like every time so far my tournament record against Vayu Turbo this year is XO. I believe I'm 2-0 versus Vayu Turbo this year. No, that's not true. That's true. I think I'm 2-1 versus Vayu Turbo if you're counting online tournaments as well. But every time I play the deck, my hand is just like Vayus and Raikos. Unlike Blackwings, where you have like Icarus Attack to like truly convert the Vayu into real cards, you have to draw Dark Grepher in the Vayu Turbo decks, and Dark Grepher is like kind of an underpowered monster just sitting in play, and that's the only way you can convert Vayu into a real drawn card. Otherwise, just having it in your hand is you have an 800 vanilla monster, which is pretty bad. Whereas Icarus Attack is a way to convert Vayu into 2 real cards, basically. An instant destruction of 2 different cards is very, very nice, and you play less of them. So I think you could argue that Vayu is a brick in this deck, but you could also pump it up with Kalut. You can search it for free off Whirlwind or Shura, so it's no longer in your deck very easily. And then again, you can convert it with the Icarus Attacks. This deck is just crazy. I think Blackwings is just crazy. It's like one of the most fun decks to play. It's one of the most skill-intensive decks to play. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It is one of the most fun mirror matches to play. I love playing the Blackwing mirror. I love this deck. I think it's very strong. It's one of the top 3 decks in the format, uncontested in my opinion. Yeah, I don't know. There's really not much to say about this deck that hasn't already been said. I can make more advanced guides on it if people want it. I've already made a guide on this deck, the Ultimate Blackwing Guide to Edison format. There's a bunch of different decks you can play. This is more or less the most straightforward list I could find that has like all of the things that people are currently playing a lot of right now. This just looks like the list that everyone is playing right now, more or less. Sometimes people have DD Crows on the side, but that's like the big difference. Deck's very strong. Very, very strong. If you go to an Edison tournament, you should expect to play against Blackwings. That being said, in the last year and a half, I've only played against Blackwings twice, so it's not nearly as dominant as some people may say. Like I said earlier in the video, it's maybe about 10% of the field, but a lot of people will be playing this deck, usually, so you definitely want to have a sideboard plan for it, because 10% of the field is still 1 in 10 matches, you know? Like, it's still a good chance, high chance that you'll play against it. Alright, next deck. 6 Samurai. Yeah, get the fuck out. GTFO tier. Grandmaster of the 6. Yeah, this deck is bad. I don't know. It's just bad. Unfortunate because it's a sweet deck. And like on paper, you'd think, oh, it's very similar to Blackwings, right? Because you have Gateway. But the issue is that the Blackwing monsters that you search off Black Whirlwind are insane. Whereas the 6 Samurai monsters you search off Gateway are like Cayman. You know what I mean? They're like 1,300 vanillas. Like, they don't do anything. So, yes, Gateway of the 6 is broken. It is incredibly powerful. And when you do open it with Grandmaster and a normal summon, you do have win potential against most of the rest of the decks in the format. But that being said, I feel like this type of deck is going to struggle in general unless you have some really hateful anti-meta cards or you just have an insane nut draw. Your average draws with this deck are going to be very bad. So, while it technically can top with luck, I think it is definitely GTFO tier because it's just worse than all of these decks in here. Like, if you think about the fish deck playing Yugioh, this deck is playing 3 Yugiohs in Yaichi. You know what I mean? Like, this deck is playing even more. Like, basically all of your monsters are bricks. You're just hoping to draw the spell cards that turn them into real cards. So, yeah, I think this deck is definitely in GTFO tier. I would love to see it top. It would be one of the most hyped things in the world to see 6 Samurai top an RBET or top a DDV or top, like, an Ultimate Time Wizard event. It would be so cool. It just will never happen. So, if you are planning on building this deck, just understand that the best you're going to get is maybe, like, a positive record at a tournament. Okay, next deck. Next deck is, like, Tuningware nonsense decks. This is just the example list I have pulled up. I played this on the channel recently. You can find the video. I love Tuningware nonsense decks. I think they have potential. I think any sort of machine duplication decks have potential. I think this card in general is very underexplored. I think a lot of people have attempted it and they've gotten close. So I think that this deck is on the cusp of being in the can top with luck or can top tier. I just think we need more people to experiment with it. This is a list I've never seen anyone play anything like before. And I built it one day and I was playing it and I was having a pretty good time playing it. I had turns where I was drawing like 6+ cards in a turn, which is crazy. Like, that's not something you can say about most other Edison decks. And you do get to play a lot of the most powerful cards in the format. Like, you get to play Quick Draw Dandy Debris, you can play Dark Armed, you know, like, the deck is inherently a bunch of strong cards that you draw into off of your duplicated machines. I think the biggest issue with decks like this is that people don't like drawing multiple Tuningware or machine dupe without a target or the targets without the machine dupe. I think that that's the biggest issue with decks like this, but someone out there definitely can figure out a way to solve this. I would not be surprised to see a deck like this top an RBET or top an Ultimate Time Wizard event or win a PS5 tournament somewhere. I would not be surprised to see a deck like this move up into the Ken top tier. All right, next deck. We're speeding through these bad boys. We got X-Sabers. Sadly, as much as I would like to place X-Sabers in any other tier, it's got to be in GTFO tier. And honestly, I think it's for the best. I think the later formats where X-Saber is a good deck, it's not fun. I think it's a not fun, uninteractive deck where they're summoning like Machina Beasts, Machina Variants, and they're like creating these prison-style situations that they're just not fun, or they're hand looping you turn 1 with like cat double fall troll, that sort of thing in later formats. So I think it's actually a much better thing for the health of the format that this deck sucks. If this deck was good, it would make the format a lot less fun and a lot less interesting and a lot less dynamic. There's a deck that's similar to this that is good that we're gonna get into in a minute, but this deck I'm pretty happy it sucks. Even though it's a fun deck and it has some cool interactions, I'm glad that that's where it's at in Edison format. But yeah, ultimately, the deck has too many bricks. It needs to have 2 shitty monsters in play and a fall troll in hand to ever really get anything going. Otherwise, it's just mediocre. Even the power card, Gotham's Emergency Call, is like a bad Blizzard if you think about it. Because at most, you're summoning a 3-star tuner and a non-tuner, and you're making a 6-star. And that's just a Blizzard that can't make Armed Wing if you think about it. So even their power card, and it's a trap card that you have to set on top of that. So yeah, I think this deck is functionally very... It's unique. It does a lot of unique things, but I think it's very bad in Edison format, and that's for the best. All right, next deck. We've got Zombies, finally getting into everybody's favorite deck list, Zombies. This was actually my favorite deck back during Edison format and the format before Edison format. At the time, it was my favorite deck just because the cards looked so sick and they had such a tight appeal to them back in the day. Like seeing a Secret Goblin Zombie was like, damn, that's sick. You know what I mean? Like you saw someone's like pimped out zombie deck and it had like, well, back then they didn't have ulti Kaiases, but they had like gold Kaiases and like super pyramid turtles and like the secret dad and the super reaper and their ultimate green plague spreader. And you saw their like swagged out zombie list and you were like, that is fire. And then Diva Zombie dropped and everyone was like, Diva Zombies plus, or Diva, Deep Sea Diva plus like heroes and stuff. And everyone was doing crazy stuff with it. Back in the day, it was really cool. Knowing what I know about the game now, I think this deck is less cool. It isn't as cool as I thought it was. It is a fun deck. It is a cool synchro combo deck, but it's gotten a little bit more linear than before. This is Best Yu-Gi-Oh! Player NA's top 8 list from, I believe, RBET. This deck has 1 RBETs. I'm going to put it actually in the tier list over Vayu Turbo. I believe it's worse than Hero Frogs, better than Vayu Turbo. I gotta move all these pictures over. God. All right, moving the boys. Professionalism at its finest. But yeah, this deck can win tournaments. It has won tournaments, and it will probably continue to put up results just because the inherent power level of the deck is very high. Just because all you need is a Goblin Zombie in play and a Deep Sea Diva in hand, and if that resolves, you're usually OTKing people as long as you have 1 extender. And the extenders can range anywhere from like a Malicious Engrave to a Book of Life to a Miracle Fusion to a Return to a Call to Dark Armed himself, or just having an extra monster in play already. So yeah, it's very easy to put together 2 3-card, 2.5 card OTKs with this deck. It gets to play a lot of the best cards in the format: Future Fusion, Miracle Fusion, Heavy Storm, Dark Armed Dragon. It's one of the best Kaias decks. You got a lot of +1 Kaiases where you sack Goblin or Mizuki for Kaias. You get to play this really cool graveyard game with Zombie Master. You have easy access to Spear Reaper. It's a difficult deck to attack and rush down because of Pyramid Turtle. It has a pretty good Blackwing matchup, which most of the other top decks can't really boast. If you look at the top decks right here, Blackwings has a good matchup against all of these decks except Fairies and Diva Zombies. So that's why I think this deck definitely has the can win tier listing. I think my issue with playing this deck is the linear nature of it, how badly it loses to cards like Compulsory Evacuation Device, how kind of slow it is to get going. It has difficulty rushing down some of the faster and more combo-oriented decks. That being said, it's sticky, so it's kind of you don't really need to rush down decks. You can kind of just play a slower, like, stickier game, and it's harder for decks to rush you down. The deck does struggle with Drago out of Dragons. It does struggle with a few other cards. Christia, of course. It struggles with, like, Fossil Dyna a little bit, Vanity's Fiend a little bit. It struggles if you're just getting Kaiast every turn by Frogs, although you do have some Game 1 ways to deal with Treeborn Frog in Book of Life and Revive King Hades. I still think, overall, the deck is strong enough to put in Can Win tier, and it has won. So I kind of have to put it there. All right, next deck. Next deck, Welly Dad. Again, this deck has topped, but it hasn't yet won a tournament. So I'm going to put it in Ken top. There was a very similar list that was like teleport zombies that did well kind of recently at a tournament. But I think you got to put it in Ken top just because even though it's functionally the same deck as the Diva Zombie deck, it just hasn't won anything yet. And the only reason I'm really putting Diva Zombie in this list, in the Ken win list, is because it won an RBET at the beginning of this year. That's literally it. If it hadn't won that RBET, I'd probably be putting it in Ken top. But because it did have that clutch win, I'm going to put it in the Ken win tier list. But yeah, all right, moving on. If this deck wins, then it moves up. That's basically it. But until then, I can't move it up because it hasn't really won. All right, next deck. Next deck, I do believe it to be very strong, by the way, is Diva HERO Beasts. This deck is way more popular than I think it should be. Its conversion rate is actually lower than any other deck for its representation, if that makes sense. Hold everybody, I gotta find something. Oh, I have something for this. I'm gonna use Skyscraper to represent it, but the deck no longer plays Skyscraper. Some versions of it do play Skyscraper. I think that version of it is arguably a little bit better. It got second place at RBET Rulers last year. Pro Storm did top an RBET with it, but he wasn't playing Divas. He was playing like the Gold and Skyscraper and Skill Drain, which I think is a slightly better list. I'm going to put this deck in Ken top. It's definitely a deck that needs to draw its synergies. If you miss on a hero, the deck doesn't do anything. Miracle Fusion is a good late game payoff, but I'll get into it in a second why there are just better decks at taking advantage of that, like Frog Hero, for example, or another deck we will talk about here in a second. I just think that this is like the cop-out deck. This is the, I don't want to lose really badly to anything, but I'm not going to beat anyone really badly either. It's a consistent deck. It will get you tops. It will win you smaller events. But I don't think this deck has what it takes to really take down a bigger tournament, just because I think the ceiling is way too low. If you add in a Bubble Man, then you start getting towards the list that tops Nats, which was the biggest tournament. Then you have that OTK potential. If you start adding in Return, Plague, the types of cards that KJH was advocating for, you increase the ceiling of the deck. And I think you start getting into a more like playable territory deck, and then, or not playable, but more like high enough ceiling to win a tournament territory deck. And then you get closer and closer to the next deck I want to talk about, which is not this. Fake out, pump fake. Oh, we got fucking Diva HERO. Diva HERO. This is Oscar's second place deck list from RBET Moval. He's won like 4 PS5 tournaments with this deck or some shit like that. This deck won the Ultimate Time Wizard in Europe event. This deck got second place at Nats at the EU Nats Time Wizard event. This is by far, in my opinion, the superior Miracle Fusion deck with Diva. If you're going to play a Miracle Fusion deck with Diva, don't play the Alias list. Just play this one. It's just better. You have a higher ceiling. You have more powerful cards. You have access to Kaias, which just crushes certain decks, like Zombies, which can sometimes give the Alias deck a problem. Doesn't give this deck a problem at all. This deck just rushes down Zombies. You just go Evil Guy, Prodigy, and then sack for Kaias, banish their turtle, and then they're just 2 backfooting. And then you have Miracle Fusion to set up Absolute Zero to make sure they can never Bryonic reversal you. So you can set up a lot of checkmate boards with this deck. This is, in my opinion, the superior deck. The biggest issue with this deck is the Gilman and the double malicious bricks. That is definitely the biggest issue with this deck. Is it does have those brickier hands, but that being said, like the other deck can also brick on Gilman just the same. So it's not like you're taking away the weakness of the deck. You're just taking away the gut punch of the deck. You know what I mean? This deck is also weaker to Royal Oppression, but you can compensate. Ooh, wrong deck. You can compensate that by playing higher counts of Snowman Eater if you want to, or less counts of like Armageddon Plague Dark Armed, and just like higher counts of Snowman Eater, and like maybe even like main deck Mobius or main deck Dust Tornado. I know some people have had success with even main deck Royal Decree in this deck as a way to just secure your position, secure your OTK. I think this deck is very strong. I actually want to rate this deck much higher than all of these other decks below it. Where am I going with this? Substitute. Substitute lower. I gotta figure out a better way to do these tier lists, you know what I'm saying? Because this is not the move. Alright, cool. I think Diva HERO is up there. It goes in and out for me, right? Because if you don't brick with the deck, it is definitely better than Dragon Turbo. Like, it is legitimately the best deck in the format if you don't brick with it. The issue is that you can brick with it, and that happens quite frequently. I'd say like 20% of games, maybe 15 to 20% of games. And you can play out of bricks with this deck. It's just miserable and boring and not fun, and not as strong, exactly. I think this deck, it's somewhere in the Hero Frog territory. I think it's about as strong as Hero Frog, maybe a little bit less strong than Hero Frog, maybe a little bit more strong than Hero Frog, but I would rank it about there. I think it's a little bit worse than the Super Rejuvenation decks, particularly like the Ghost Rider style builds that we've seen taking down RBETs this year, but I think it has the same like crazy potential. Speaking of having potential, Vayu Turbo. This is a deck list that I think has a lot of potential. It's kind of slept on. It's kind of like the Amaryllis version of hero decks. The engine is really cool. Plasma is a really strong card that gives you kind of free wins into a lot of matchups. Like, it's insane versus Frogs. It's insane versus Quick Draw and Dragon Turbo, and some other decks just like, you stick a Plasma and they're like, oh, what do I do? Like, if you summon a Plasma, it's like, it's Jover, you know what I'm saying? So this card's pretty crazy. Dark Samorg is pretty crazy. This can lock out crazy decks. This deck has a lot more OTK potential. It's a lot more turbo. You can spam Stratos and like net advantage off the Stratos spam much more easily. I think this is a deck that has potential. I'm going to put it in has potential for now. Obviously, it hasn't done anything. I put this in has potential in my last tier list, and nobody really explored with it that much. But every time I play the deck, I'm consistently impressed with it. I'm able to take down top meta decks with it. I think it's just a deck that deserves recognition, deserves consideration, and deserves some sort of testing. This is the list I've had the most success with. I'm very happy with this list overall. There are a few changes I might want to make to the sideboard, but overall, I really, really like this list, and I really, really like this deck. I think it has a lot of potential. So I'm going to put it in the has potential tier. I would not be surprised to see this exact 45 card list or 55 card list top tournament. I would not be surprised at all. I'd be like, yeah, I expected that, because the deck is just, it has that high of a ceiling. I'll have to do more members only videos on this deck to show off exactly how it works, but there's a lot of like, basically what you do is you search Stratos, you get access to either Diamond Dude, Malicious, or Ocean, and then you start looping Stratos by letting it die, banishing it with Dark Samorg or Phoenix Blade, and then bringing it back with DDR. So you basically have like free DDR spam, and it lets you empty your whole deck once you have access to that Stratos, and you can summon like about 6-7 monsters in like a good turn, where you have like special E-autos, normal Stratos, search your guy, and then that's 4,300 right there. And then if they die or whatever, you can use the DDR to pitch something, bring back the Stratos, get more searches. You can empty your graveyard for E-autos thanks to Samorg and Divine Sword, so you don't have dead E-autos later in the game. It's a cool deck. It's a cool deck. I will make more videos on it. I think it definitely has potential. All right, moving on. Next deck. What is this one? Gravekeepers. Gravekeepers is a really, really strong deck. I think it's really solid. I'm going to put it in has potential. It's interesting. It actually won one of the biggest paper Edison tournaments before the RBETs happened. And then it kind of just like has shied away. I'm going to put it in has potential. I think it's definitely as strong as can top. If you told me Gravekeepers topped the tournament, I would not be shocked at all. It actually has some really insane matchups against the top tier. So if you look at the top tier, what you've got right now is you've got Amaryllis. Gravekeepers beats the fuck out of Amaryllis. You got Vayu Turbo. Gravekeepers beats the fuck out of Vayu Turbo. Any zombie Miracle Fusion deck, Gravekeepers destroys those decks, except for potentially the Frog one, because Treeborn Frog's a bitch, and it gets under Necro Valley and Edison format. The only thing Gravekeepers struggles with here is like Blackwings, Fairies, and Dragons can give Gravekeepers some trouble. But even those decks, as long as you can break the first red med after a future fusion, they can't use their further Wyverns. I think that this deck has what it takes just because of its matchup spread into the top decks. It's a really, really, really underrated deck in Edison format, and not enough people play it. I think the reason not enough people play it is it gets a lot of a bad rap for being an unfun deck, In later formats, it becomes more of a Royal Tribute spam deck with Pot of Duality. But I think in Edison format, this deck is more of an aggro deck, like more of an aggro rush deck than it is a Royal Tribute deck. And it's a lot more fun than people give it credit for. I think you should definitely try it out if you're looking for like a fun aggro rush deck. It's one of my favorite decks to play. I think it's one of the most fun decks in the format to play. And being able to lock out like obnoxious cards like Miracle Fusion, Mizuki, Amaryllis, even Phantom of Chaos on Norleras is really, really powerful. So it definitely is in the has potential tier for me. Next deck, we've got Gemini. So Gemini got, I believe, 9th at the NAWCQ tournament. It's like almost topped like a bunch of other random tournaments. It's won a bunch of side events. I think the biggest issue with Gemini is that people now know what it does. So like people know how to side against it. Like people got a chance to figure out the deck. The biggest thing this deck had going for it was the misinformation and like the really uniqueness of the build. Now that people kind of know what it does, it's gotten a little bit worse. I'm definitely going to put it in Can Top with Luck. I think it's better than Rescue Cat. I think it's about as strong as like the Fish Synchro deck is. But I think it's a good deck. I think it's a legit deck that has potential to top with Luck. Once again, like I said, the deck's creator, BK Kids Club, he took this deck to top 16 at Nats. And so I would not be surprised to see this deck top 8 an RBET or top 8 something after that if you had a really exceptional pilot. Similar to like the Fish deck. I think it definitely gets better with the pilot, if that makes sense. Alright, next deck. I've made a bunch of videos on Gemini, so if you want to check those out, you can see how the deck works. It's super fun. Definitely one of the more fun decks in the format. Gladiator Beasts, GTFO tier, not even close. I was like trying to make a Gladiator Beast video yesterday, and yeah, I'm just gonna be real. It just didn't. I went like 1-3. All of the games I lost were like absolute butcherings. Like I was just like, man, this deck just doesn't have what it takes. It just literally doesn't have what it takes. This list is a meme, but this list is showing off a lot of the different cards you could potentially play in Gladiator Beasts. Obviously, you'd see more of a 40 card list with like Prisma and stuff. The only result Gladiator Beasts has had thus far in the entire RBET 2-year RBET series is Gladiator Beasts got top 8 at that 97 person tournament, which I can't remember where it was at, but it has one top at one tournament, and the guy who was playing it is a very powerful player, Sean McCabe. You guys might know him, and I think that's definitely a situation of player elevating deck rather than deck elevating player. It was very heavily metagamed. It had like triple main deck traps done. He played against a bunch of Blackwing players and just rolled them. But I think that Gladiator Beasts is in GTFO tier. I think if you bring this deck to a tournament, you pretty much have to expect that you will probably have a negative record or an even record. The deck is very weak. Your inherent monster power level is just very low. You're forced to play bricks like Murmillo and Ready Ari, and you can't really get around them. And unfortunately, you have to play long games because it's not an OTK deck, so your chances of drawing these bricks is very, 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 very high. So I think this deck is just... It has some powerful combos. It has some insane matchups. Like, Gladiator Beast has like a 100-0 matchup versus Dragon Turbo. And it has like a 100-0 matchup versus like Frogs, like Frog Monarchs. But it's just not a good enough deck because against like your average deck up here, you're just going to get rolled. Like if someone summons a Jinzo against you, game 1, if you don't have like Cyber Dragon, Prisma, something like that, you're just done. You're just cooked. If someone summons a Machina Fortress, it's like Jover. You know what I mean? So it just struggles with like some of the more top-end threats of the format. Absolute Zero is very difficult for the deck to deal with. Even an Armed Wing is very difficult for the... Even a fucking Gemini Elf is difficult for this deck to deal with because you have to spend cards to out 1900 monsters. It has some auto-lose matchups against very common decks, like the Alias deck is an auto-lose matchup for the Glad deck, and the Alias deck, as of right now, is the second most common deck in the format, despite me thinking it's not really the best. Or not really the best pick if you want to win a tournament. So, yeah, just having bad matchups against Blackwings and the Alias deck, it's just going to put you in GTFO tier. Against 25% of the field, you're just going to have like an auto loss, 20 to 25%. Can't bring that to a tournament. That's just the way it is. Until Blackwings and Hero Beat are played less, which I think might end up happening as the format moves forward. I don't think you'll see a Glad deck top. All right, next deck. We got 3 more. wow, we actually went through it pretty quick, is Stun. Anti-meta. I think this deck has a lot of potential. If you can get the right bracket, you can top with it. I'm going to put it in has potential just because we haven't really seen a pure, like, old school anti-meta deck really top. We've seen variations of it top, like we've seen hero stun decks. Alafia had like a very similar deck to this with like a mini Stratos engine in it. Instead of the Banishers and the Dynas, he had like Stratoses and Spies, which was cool. Or not Stratoses, but Stratos, Alias, and Spies. So we've seen like variations of this deck top, and I think it definitely has the potential to top. So I'm going to put it in has potential. It doesn't take much explanation what this deck does. It's trying to lock out the opponent with monsters that have effects that make it difficult for your opponent to play. So yeah, Stun, really fun deck, in my opinion. I think it's a great time playing Stun. It does have some weaker matchups. I think it can struggle with Hero Beat a little bit. Just depends on your draw. It can struggle with cards like Jinzo. It can struggle with like Dragons. It can struggle with Fairies. Fairies is an auto loss matchup for this if you don't open Banisher. It's so bad. Fairies just beats up on decks like this so badly. So yeah, Blackwings is not a great matchup. Blackwings is never going to be a great matchup unless you're heavily metagaming for it, like with main deck Sirokkos and whatnot. So I think this is definitely and has potential. You might have to metagame the list a little bit more, but fun deck for sure. All right, next deck is Chain Burn. This is Frog Slicer's Chain Burn list. I recently did a stream with it. I'm not going to explain the deck. Go watch that stream. It was 2.5 hours of me going undefeated with Chain Burn. You get to see me play it in a wide variety of matchups. You get to see me navigate a lot of very difficult situations with the deck. I think this deck is incredibly underrated. I think Chain Burn is just really good overall. I think it can top tournaments. I'm gonna just go ahead and place it in can top tournaments. This deck is cool. It's like legitimately strong. It has a lot of like, it doesn't really have any terrible matchups outside of Blackwings. It does lose to specific cards pretty hard. Like Royal Decree gives this deck a lot of trouble, obviously. Jinzo gives this deck a lot of trouble, obviously. Anything that's shutting off large amounts of trap cards, trap stun, even like a random 7 tools here and there can kind of be annoying for this deck. But I think if you can just dodge those cards, like you have an insane deck that's like really strong. It is a little bit nerfed. Chain Strike's at 2 in the format. Ojama, Trio, Ceasefire, and Magic Cylinder are all limited to 1 in the format, so it's not as over-the-top powerful as you'd expect. But I think it's a deck that people sleep on, and it's a deck that has a lot of potential. I think it's about as strong as like any of the other decks in Ken top tier. I would not be surprised to see Chain Burn make it into top 8 of a tournament, especially in the hands of a player like Frog Slicer, someone who's like just genuinely really talented with the deck. So yeah, and then I got one more deck for you guys today for today's tier list, which is Zombie Plants. This is a deck that is designed by New Syntax. No, this isn't Zombie Plants. What the heck is this? This isn't Zombie Plants. Well, this is functionally what Zombie Plants looks like. You just cut a quick draw, and you cut a Caius, and you cut like one other card, and you add a Mizuki, a Goblin Zombie, Plague, and like a Spirit Reaper, and then you play Zombie Plants, and then you fix the extra deck to look like it. It's basically like a tomato box deck, which looks similar to this, where you have double Mark of the Rose. You don't play Avarice, you don't play like 2 quick draw, you usually play like 1 quick draw. And then sometimes you don't play some of the cards like you don't play like the main deck Dust Tornado or the main deck Phoenix Wing, and you just play like zombie cards in it. Or sometimes you do play the Phoenix Wing. I don't know. I tweeted out New Syntax's most recent topping list. This deck definitely can top tournaments. Actually, I'm going to put it in can win tournaments because I think this deck is very strong. It's got all of the strengths of Amaryllis, which is Mark of the Rose, and Titanial, and it has all of the strengths of Zombies, which is the zombie package, the Mystic Tomato into the zombie package, and then you have a perfect bridge in Mystic Tomato and Lone Fire to set up to be able to play Mark of the Rose, which is one of the most powerful spell cards in the format. It's just a themed Snatch Steal. It's very, very strong. Yeah. Once again, follow me on Twitter at E3 Yugioh. You can find the most up-to-date New Syntax Zombie Plant list there. I was not super prepared with this. But this is going to be my tier list before RBET Rulers. Let's take a quick look at this. I think these decks up here, Fairies, Blackwings, Dragons, Dragon Turbo, Frog Hero, Diva Hero, Diva Zombie, Vayu Turbo, Amaryllis, Norleras, Jinzo, and Zombie Plant. If any one of these won RBET Rulers, I would not be surprised. If anything below this wins RBET Rulers, I would be surprised. I think you're looking at, like, in Edison format at any given moment, somewhere between 10 and 15 decks that could take down a whole tournament just because of their high ceiling. And then you're looking at somewhere between like 20 and 30 decks that could top that tournament. And then on top of that, like I said at the beginning of this video, there are a bunch of decks that are underexplored. There are a bunch of decks that haven't yet been labbed out. There are some really cool decks going around. I know there's the Shiba Warrior Black Garden deck that Raunuk recently topped with. There's like a bunch of like really unique deck lists that just haven't really been explored. And I think Edison format is the deepest format by far. It is a format where whatever you want to play, you can at least take to a tournament and have a good time, maybe get some wins along the way. And yeah, just about anything in the format you want to do goes. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Become a member if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one. We're going to be doing a lot of videos, a lot of content, pumping out stuff before RBET Rulers, just to get you guys hyped for that end of the year tournament. So see you guys tomorrow. Peace.